Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Viewers, this is the third episode of the 20th topic. We are discussing the transmission of the Quran, the way it was transmitted from the Sahaba to the later generations. In the earlier episodes, we had seen how the Qira'atul Amma, as our earliest scholars would call it, was transmitted by the perpetual concurrence, in fact, verbal perpetual concurrence, also called tawatur, and by ijma, two modes of transmission which yield certitude and a faithful transmission of the contents that they transmit. Now, if this is the conclusion that we had drawn in the last two episodes, and also given some details regarding how we see this consensus and ijma on the text of the Quran, and also how this concurrence in perpetual tawatur or verbal perpetual tawatur is seen. Now, I had described before you that there are certain questions which arise in the background of this view, because there are certain things that would seem unexplained, and I'd like to take up those questions in this episode and perhaps in the next one as well. Let me enumerate some of these questions which arise in the minds of people, or which can arise in the minds of the people vis-a-vis the data that is found regarding the Quranic readings of today. Now, the first question, viewers, is that what exactly is the origin of the huge corpus of variant readings which is found in our hadith, tafsir, fiqh books? We know that our tafsir books in particular, the earliest ones, are replete with variant readings which are not in conformity at all with the Qira'atul Amma, and they have different declensions, and at times they have different letters as well. So what exactly is the origin, and how do we find them in such huge quantities in our earliest books of tafsir and Ma'an al-Quran and even hadith and fiqh manuals, and we even find our scholars adducing from them? This is the first question. I'm enumerating the questions first, and then I'll take up each of these questions one by one. The second question is that why at all are they regarded as admissible, when we know that the Qira'atul Amma, as has been claimed, is the Qira'at on which the Almighty had bound the Prophet to read the Quran? Then why at all are these readings admissible? Why are they regarded to be part of the Quran, or Quran per se? So this is the second question that we're going to deal with. Then there's a third question that we're going to deal with, and that is that we know that in the 3rd century or so, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid selected 7 readings from amongst various scholars, and he actually regarded 7 scholars to be the readers who were actually transmitting readings who according to him was safely ascribed to the Prophet, and he actually selected them in his Kitab al-Sahaba, and they came to be known as the 7 famous canonical readers. So the question that arises about these readings is that, are these readings mutawatir or not? Because we have seen people claim that they are mutawatir. If they are mutawatir, and we also find the Qira'atul Amma to be of this stature or this status, then how do we relate or reconcile this phenomenon? The fourth question, viewers, is that what exactly is the connotation of tawatur transmission in the view of general Muslim scholars? This question, viewers, has arisen because we know that many of our traditional Muslim scholars do not regard these readings to be mutawatir. We had already discussed them in an earlier topic, that there are so many scholars who do not regard them to be mutawatir. So how do we reconcile with this fact that in spite of this, that the readings are not mutawatir, that Quran is still claimed to have tawatur? The fifth question, viewers, is that why do some countries have a certain set of canonical readings today? We had seen that there are almost a dozen countries which follow a complete set of Quranic readings. We know, for example, the reading of Nafi is prevalent in many parts of North Africa. Similarly, the reading of Duri is from Abu Amr is actually prevalent in parts of Yemen. So that is actually the next question. But the fifth question is that we have whole countries following a particular set of canonical readings. And the sixth question, which is actually an offshoot of this fifth question, is that although they are besides being complete countries, we have parts of certain countries which have readings, a set of canonical readings, as is the case of Duri, which I just gave, and it is prevalent in Yemen. So Duri from Abu Amr, although it's not prevalent in the whole of Yemen, but in Hadramaut, a place within Yemen, we find in a particular area that reading is confined and read and taught. So the sixth question is that why do some countries as a whole, as opposed to parts, have adopted a certain canonical reading? So these, viewers, are the six questions which might naturally arise on the view that we had formed, or I had humbly presented before you in the last two episodes. So let me begin by answering each of these questions one by one. Now, the first question, as you recall, was regarding the origin of these variant readings. How is a huge corpus of this variant readings found in our books of tafsir and Ma'an al-Qur'an and hadith and fiqh and many others? So to me, there are some reasons which actually account for these readings, and they can be easily deciphered as well. The first reason for this large amount of varied reading, viewers, is that, as I have been discussing all along, and as has been pointed out by Imam Farahi himself, and as also all our scholars agree, that the Quran that we have today, of course, is in a different sequence than it was in its chronological sequence. It was recompiled according to the Quran itself. It was given a new sequence, and it had an original sequence which can be called the chronological sequence, or the sequence in which it was revealed historically. So to me, it seems that there were readings which were perhaps slightly changed in their tenses, or could have been abrogated in that chronological sequence, and ultimately we had that final sequence. So it seems that some of these readings survived. The chronological readings, they survived, and they formed part of the corpus of the variant readings that was recorded by the Sahaba earlier on, and of course by then their students. So the remnants of the chronological revelation of the Quran, and these remnants, of course, in the final review, they were either revoked or changed, or given new constructions. But the previous chronological revelations, of course, since they were written down by the Sahaba and they were also memorized by them, it seems that they prevailed. And although it was clear that they were merely a historical record, but it seems that some of their students, or maybe some of the later people, regarded them to be readings per se, as true reflection of the Quran. And I would like to present some evidence to this deduction that I have made. I do present a narrative from Imam Bukhari, Al-Jami' al-Sahih, and it is by none other than Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, and it seems that he is actually ascribing, he's telling us about Ubay ibn Ka'b, again a very famous companion of the Prophet, that he would insist in not leaving anything that he had directly heard from the Prophet. And in all probability, in many of these readings that he heard from the Prophet were, when in the Arzai Akhira, when they were in the final review, they were changed. He insisted, if this description is true, he insisted in the previous reading as well. Of course, not as the fact that they were correct reflections of the Quran, but he wanted them to be kept with him as historical records. So Imam Bukhari, his Al-Jami' al-Sahih, has recorded this incident. So it says that قال عمر رضي الله عنه أقرؤون أبي وأقضان علي وإنا لن ندع من قول أبي وذاك أن أبي يقول لا أدع شيئا سمعته من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقد قال الله تعالى ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها. So Umar said, Ubay was the best citer amongst us, and Ali was the best judge among us. And then the thing that is of note must be noted is that we would leave recitals of Ubay, and this is because Ubay would say, I will not leave a thing that I have heard from the Prophet. And God Almighty has said, we do not abrogate a verse or make it forget. So it seems that even in cases of when there was an abrogation, Ubay would insist on the fact that he still would like that verse to be kept as a record in his Musaf maybe, or in his memory, knowing full well, of course, that the Quran was revised later on. But he insisted that chronological revelation should also be left with him in his Musaf. And that is why Umar said that we would leave him many of his recitals, because he would insist that that his particular reading is a correct description. Of course, here when he said it is a correct description, Ubay obviously meant that in the chronological revelation, since he had heard something directly from the Prophet, he would like to keep it as a historical record. Very similar, viewers, is the case with Abdullah ibn Masud. We have discussed in detail in an earlier topic that Abdullah ibn Masud had refused to hand over his Quran to the Uthmanic officials when they had come up to gather Musafs or Messiah who they thought was spurious. And the reason, viewers, that he gave was that he had heard certain surahs directly from the Prophet. And some narratives say that he said that he had learned 70 surahs directly from the Prophet. Again here, if we collect all the material, it seems to me that Abdullah bin Masud had some readings of the chronological revelation recorded with him in his Musaf, and since he had heard them directly from the Prophet as an academic and an historic record, he did not want to give them up, and he wanted to maintain it with him. Just to give you a small example, there are a number of narratives in this regard, but I'm going to quickly move on to this narrative, which I have already discussed under topic 9. So I'm just going to skip the Arabic because I've already discussed it earlier on. Just quickly reading the translation of this narrative. This narrative, viewers, is found in Abu Ubaid's Fazail al-Quran. It says, Amr ibn Sharahbil, Abu Maysara, he is the person who reports this narrative. He says, a person came over to me while I was praying and said, may your mother lose you. I see you praying while the complete destruction of the book of God has been ordered. I shortened my prayer, and I was not one who could be stopped. I entered the house and was not stopped, and I climbed the stairs and was not stopped. And then it came to my notice that Huzaifa and Ibn Masud were conversing with one another, and the former was saying to the latter, now this is the question, hand over the Musaf to them. He replied, by God, I will not hand over the Musaf to them. He again said, hand over the Musaf to them, for they will leave no stone unturned in wanting the good of the Ummah of Muhammad. Ibn Masud responded, by God, I will not hand over the Musaf to them. The Prophet taught a little over 70 surahs to me, and should I hand them over the Musaf to them? By God, I will not hand it over to them. So, viewers, if we look at such narratives, such similar reports in history, we find that it appears that these two scholars in particular, Abdullah ibn Masud and Ubay ibn Ka'b, they were scholars of the very adept scholars, and arguably we can also see that the huge corpus of variant readings that we find in our earliest books is actually ascribed to these two scholars. A very large chunk of variant readings is from these two scholars, and it seems because these two scholars perhaps wanted to keep the earlier chronological revelation intact with them. Of course, they knew that this chronological revelation, since they had heard it directly from the Prophet, has some historical importance, but they full well knew that this was not the final Quran, because we know that the Quran was revised, and Abdullah ibn Masud himself was a witness to the final review. He was there and he knew. But I think it's a very natural, emotional attachment to the Prophet himself, and anyone who would have heard something from him would not like to have it lose it because of his attachment to that particular thing, because that was heard from the Prophet. So it seems that Ubay ibn Ka'b and Abdullah ibn Masud had these chronological qira'at with them recorded, and they even transferred them to their students. And I'm sure with this specification that this is this historical record, but it seems that this line became blurred, and the scholars themselves, the students of these two great scholars, and then their students, so the ulama of our ummah, inherited these variant readings, and the line became blurred that these are merely readings of the chronological sequence, and they should be kept as a historical record. But as far as the ummah itself is concerned, we know that the Qira'atul Amma prevailed in them. So it seems we have a parallel transmission of the Qur'an. We have these remnants of the earliest chronological revelation being transmitted by the scholar companions like Ubay and Abdullah bin Masud to their students, and from their students to their students, ultimately to the scholars who became the inheritors of these students, and then they recorded them in their tafsir and fiqh books. But as far as the actual transmission of the Quran was concerned regarding the Qira'atul Amma, these two companions themselves also, it seems, full well knew that it was the Qira'atul Amma that was the final Qira'at. And it also seems that this line actually became blurred as time passed. So this is one of the reasons, I would say, that that is the cause of these variant readings. Viewers, the second cause that comes to my mind, of course, is errors and omissions on the part of narrators. This cannot be ruled out. Erroneous reporting of readings from the Prophet by the narrators, of course, when they hear something, is something which is very, very probable. Thus, for example, we have this human error is very possible. So the first thing is that in this human error, readings which have been transferred orally could have been done so in a faulty manner, and hearing something and then recording it in some other fashion or learning it in some other fashion is something which is of common experience. And one of the results of these variant readings could be this faulty transmission or faulty hearing on the part of various narrators who transmitted these readings. Another thing that comes to mind, viewers, regarding this erroneous omission and of narrators is that there are passages in the Quran which are very similar. There are passages, and this could have been easily, as certain readings could have arisen easily, because some of the passages which were very similar to one another, but when they came to be reported, one of the passages which was similar to the other prevailed. And I would like to give certain examples which might be very interesting to note. So consider this verse, "Wala yuzlamuna fatila." This is verse 49 of Surah Nisa, "Wala yuzlamuna fatila." And we have a verse of Surah Nisa also, verse 77, which says, "Wala tuzlamuna fatila." So the first instance has "Wala yuzlamuna fatila," and the other one is "Wala tuzlamuna fatila." Now, as far as the first instance is concerned, "La yuzlamuna fatila," there is no difference between any of the readers. There is absolutely no difference. However, according to Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, in the second instance, Ibn Kasir, Hamza, and Al-Kasai read "yuzlamun." So instead of yuzlamun, tuzlamun, they read "yuzlamun." So we can see this could have been easily the result of the memory of the first instance prevailing over the second one. Remember, the first instance was "yuzlamun." The second is "la tuzlamun." And in the second instance, we find readers like Ibn Kasir, Hamza, and Al-Kisai reading as "yuzlamun." So this could have been a possibility that the "yuzlamun," which was found in verse 49, remained in the memory again. And instead of reading it as "la tuzlamun," which was the actual reading, the reading "yuzlamun" prevailed. Similarly, another example, this time from Surah Araf, we have a verse which says, "Wa iz anjaynakum min ali fir'aun." And a very similar verse from Surah Ibrahim, verse 6, which says, "Wa iz anjakum min ali fir'aun." So anjaynakum and anjakum are the two differences. Now, as far as the first instance is concerned, there is, in fact, as far as the second instance is concerned, there is no difference between the readers. So all have read as is anjakum min ali Fir'aun. However, according to Ibn Mujahid, in the first instance, which is actually was anjainakum, Ibn Amir has read it as anjakum. So it could have easily been the case that the is anjakum of the second instance, which was read, it was correctly read, or got inserted in as also in as anjakum, whereas in that first instance it was anjainakum. So Ibn Amir read it as anjakum. The anjakum of the second instance became also inserted in place of the anjainakum of the first instance. And there are many other examples, viewers, that can be given in this regard, but I'll just skip them just to give you an idea how variant readings can result in such a manner. Similarly, viewers, the third reason for these variant readings that cannot be ruled out is concoction and fabrication. We know that in 2nd and 3rd centuries, many ahadiths were concocted and fabricated for various reasons that all students of the Quran know. So this also cannot be ruled out, that many of these readings could have been concocted, and they could have found their way into these hadiths and tafsir and fiqh anthologies. Now, the fourth reason, viewers, is to me actually relates to the Shah's readings. You know, remember the Shah's readings are the ones which do not satisfy the 3 criteria of transmission: that the Arabic should be correct, that they should be related to the Prophet through a reliable chain, ascribed to the Prophet through a reliable chain, and then the third is that they should be in conformity with one of the Masahif of Usman. So it was said by our classical scholars that if they do not conform to either of these 3 criteria, then they shall be classified as Shah's readings. To me, one of the origins of these Shah's readings seems to be the exegetical explanations of scholars. We see that Sahaba, they would explain certain words in verses of the Quran, and when they would explain a word, they would replace that word by a synonym, by another word, just to explain it to their students. And ultimately, this came to be perhaps known as a reading itself, a Shah's reading as itself. So the first 3 reasons that I've given mostly relate to canonical readings, but this is an explanation of Shah's readings. Thus, for example, just a single example, this is from Ibn Abdul Barz al-Tamheed. We find that Ubay ibn Ka'b read, Kana yakra'u kullama adha'a lahum mashawfi. And then he explained as marrufi sa'ufi. So it says that that mashawfi, which means they would walk in it, was explained as marru fihi and sa'u fihi, which means that they are actually synonyms. So it seems to me that these exegetical explanation of certain Quranic words became part of Shah's readings or Shah's readings themselves. So this is as far as the answer to the first question is concerned. Viewers, as far as the second question is concerned, that what is the reason for the acceptability of these variant readings, to my mind, the basic reason for the acceptability or admissibility of these variant readings is the 7 ahruf narrative that we have discussed in detail in topic 17, and I had shown that not only the text of the narrative is subject to so many questions that it cannot be accepted, but also its chain of narration is not at all. The chains of narration which are found in various books, and there are several chains, none of them is reliable. And ultimately, we had seen that there are so many interpretations, almost 40 interpretations offered by various scholars, and none of them holds ground, none of them is convincing. This critique has already been presented by me, and therefore, one of the reasons for this admissibility, or the main reason of this admissibility, in my regard, does not hold at all. Now, what should have been the case was that our scholars should have rejected all these variant readings in the light of the Quranic verse, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ, which means that when the Almighty has said that once the Quran shall be compiled afresh, then they would be bound to follow this new recital with its new sequence. But because our scholars did not interpret this verse in the light of this, the way we have seen Imam Farahi interpreting it, and instead they interpreted it the way it is ascribed or even wrongly ascribed, as I had shown to Abdullah bin Abbas, a narrative from him. They could not find any guidance as to why should they reject these readings. And earlier on, they had formed this opinion that any report which is from the Prophet, which is of Akhbar-e Ahad, if they accept other reports of other Akhbar-e Ahad, then how can they reject Akhbar-e Ahad or isolate reports which present certain readings of the Quran as well, because they would be at par. So what they would, by showing this sympathy and sensitivity towards them, that they were caught in this fix, that since they did not have this guidance or did not understand properly the verse of Surah Qiyamah, which was actually telling them to abandon all readings and just follow the reading, the final reading, they instead interpreted it in a different manner. They had no other option but to accept these readings, because if they would not accept these readings, they would have to reject ahadith as well, because these readings also are the same, are transmitted as ahadith are transmitted, and this would have obviously been a very question which actually our scholars very initially had answered very earlier on about all Akhbar-e Ahad originating from the Prophet. Our earliest Muslim scholarship, and none other than the great Imam Shafi, had formed the view that though it is not essential for the common man to acquire knowledge through the Akhbar-e Ahad, it is essential for the scholars and the select to accept them after being satisfied about their reliability. So Imam Shafi had posited this view that about these Akhbar-e Ahad, although it is not essential for the common man to acquire it, but for the scholars, they must acquire this knowledge, and therefore from here originated the acceptance of these Akhbar-e Ahad. And as I said, if they had to accept these Akhbar-e Ahad, then the variant readings also, since these earliest readings were found in these Akhbar-e Ahad, they had to accept them. And just to quote Imam Shafi in this regard, he says that وَإِلْمُ الْخَاصَّةِ سُنَّةٌ مِنْ خَبْرِ الْخَاصَّةِ يعرف العلماء ولم يكلفها غيرهم وهي موجودة فيهم أو في بعضهم بصدق الخاص المخبر عن رسول الله بها وهذا اللازم لأهل العلم أن يسيروا إليه. And the knowledge of the select is the sunnah which is acquired through their reports, which the scholars know and which is not essential for the common man to know. This sunnah is present with all the scholars, or with some of them from God's messenger, through the information provided by a reliable informant, and this is the knowledge which scholars must necessarily turn to. So this is the opinion which was formed earlier on by our scholars, and then it was accepted. So therefore, we can see how our earliest scholars were caught in this dilemma, that if they were accepting ahadith, then they had to accept these variant readings as well, because the only thing that would have stopped them to do so would have been that they were against the Qur'an in accepting them, and the only thing that made us look at the fact that they were against the Qur'an was the Quranic verse of these verses of Surah Qiyamah. But since they themselves did not take up these verses to mean the way Farahi Sahib has interpreted them, they were left in the dark in this regard. So I think this is how things should be reviewed and given a sympathetic explanation in this regard, and sympathetic placement and background to the whole issue. Now, as far as the third question is concerned, that was regarding the claim of tawatur of the 7 canonical readings, and we know that Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid in his own times had selected these 7 famous readings, and in his Kitab al-Saba he had placed them. And viewers, we know that these selections that he had made, very briefly, these 7 readers were Abu Nu'aym from Medina, they were Nafi ibn Abdurrahman from Medina, then we have Abdullah ibn Kasir from Mecca, Abu Bakr Asim ibn Najud from Kufa, Hamza ibn Zayyad from Kufa, Ali ibn Hamza al-Kisai from Kufa, again Abu Amr al-Ala from Basra, and Abdullah ibn Amir from Syria. So these are the 7 readers that he had selected, and it has been claimed by some authorities that these readings are mutawatir, but I had shown in one of the earlier topics, topic 18 to be precise, that not only these readings are not mutawatir because their chains are mentioned, they are all ahad. Even our celebrated scholars, many of them, clearly state that they are not ahad. Thus I had mentioned Tabri, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, Makki ibn Abi Talib, Ad-Dani ibn Atiyah, Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, Fakhruddin Razi, Abu Shamma, Al-Zahabi. And Al-Zahabi actually had given this very strong statement, as he said, وَمَنِ ادَّعَ تَوَاتَرَهَا فَقَدْ كَابَرَ الْحِسْ. He who claims that they are mutawatir, actually he negates observation. And we had Zarkashi, Ibn al-Jazri himself, who had even confessed that once earlier in his life he thought that these readings are mutawatir, but then he said no, they are not. And he confessed that. I had also given details. Suyuti, Shawkani, Imam Hui, all these scholars, I had given their detailed excerpts in my earlier talks when I was discussing topic 18, that all these readings, the claim that they are mutawatir is absolutely false and it's unfounded. And some of the very other reasons that I had given, very briefly, I'm going to point them out. I had shown that all these readings, these 7 canonical readings, end on 8 companions. So Ubay ibn Ka'b, Abdullah ibn Masud, Abu Darda, Osman, Ibn Affan, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Zayd ibn Sabit, Abu Huraira, Abdullah ibn Abbas. So all these readings converge on 8 companions. And how can this be thought that if these converge on 8 companions, how can they ever be regarded as mutawatir? Then we had also seen that the criteria of these acceptability of these readings never said that they are mutawatir. I just earlier on spelled out the criteria, but none of the criteria tells us that one of the criterion of accepting these readings is that they should be mutawatir, which itself tells us that they are not mutawatir. Then we had readers different with one another. We find Hamza differing with Al-Kisai, etc. Or Al-Kisai different with Hamza, which is who was his teacher. Nafi differing with one another. So had there been any tawatur between them, these readers would not have differed or even asked their students to negate the readings of other scholars and other reciters. And then we have students differing from their teachers. Thus, for example, I gave this example that it is pointed out that by Makki ibn Abi Talib that on 300 occasions Ali ibn Hamza al-Kisai differed with his teacher Hamza ibn Habib al-Zayyad. So this could never happen. I'm just giving a very brief survey of how I had tried to deduce and prove the fact that the claim that these 7 canonical readings are mutawatir has no basis. It's not just that I'm making this claim, our earliest authorities also, many of them, although there are people who think that they are mutawatir, but a very vast majority thinks that these readings are not mutawatir. And I had also examined the chains of these narrations myself and endeavored to show that at times that they are they don't even fall in the category of, or they fall in the category of the weakest of akhbar ahad. Now we come to the fourth question, and that is the connotation of the tawatur itself according to Muslim scholars. So in this regard, what needs to be understood is that the connotation of our earliest Muslim scholars is that all the Qur'an, that all that we have as the Qur'an is mutawatir. The reason that I'm raising this question is that if the canonical readings are not mutawatir, and all our scholars claim that the Qur'an is mutawatir, I have given details of this fact in the first episode of this topic, how almost all our scholars are unanimous on the facts. In fact, I can say that all of the scholars are unanimous on the fact that the Qur'an is mutawatir. But then the question arises that if the Qur'an is mutawatir and the 7 canonical readings which are selected, they are ahad or they are not mutawatir, then what exactly is the Qur'an? What exactly do we mean that the Qur'an is mutawatir when its readings are not mutawatir? Now, one answer to this is given by a celebrated authority of Qiraat, and he is Imam Badruddin Zarkashi. And he says that the text of the Qur'an and its reading should be regarded to be 2 separate things. That's the words that he uses are Al-Qur'an wal-Qira'at haqiqatan mutaghayiratan. Fal-Qur'an huwa al-wahy al-munazzal ala Muhammad lil-bayan wal-ijaz wal-Qira'at wal-Qira'at ikhtilafu alfaz al-wahy المذكور في الحروف أو كيفيتها min takhfif wa tashdid wa ghayrihima. So he says the Quran and its readings are two separate entities. So this is an interesting observation that he has made, that the Quran and its readings are two separate entities. Thus the Quran is the revelation that was sent to Muhammad to communicate religion to people and to express the helplessness of people to raise objections on it, while readings refer to a difference of words in this revelation or a difference in their pronunciation like takhfif and tashdid and other things besides these two. So according to him, the text of the Quran, the bare consonantal text of the Quran is one thing, and perhaps that is the thing that possesses tawatur. However, the intonation or the reading, the way these words can be read, that they do not possess tawatur. They actually should be viewed as a separate thing, and they could be ahad as well. So it follows that from this view that the text of the Quran is mutawatir and can be read variously, since bare diacritics and vowel sounds need to decipher it. So it clearly shows that Imam Zarkashi is telling us that only the consonantal text, the bare skeletal text without any vowel sounds, are mutawatir. A second group of scholars say that the intonation too is mutawatir. In other words, the readings or the 7 canonical readings are mutawatir. And among these scholars are, for example, Ibn al-Hajib, then we have Ibn Khaldun, and then we have Jalaluddin al-Bulqini. These are some of the scholars who say that the 7 canonical, that the Quran is, when you say the Quran is mutawatir, then it is mutawatir in its complete sense, the text as well as its pronunciation. But viewers, this is a claim which I have already examined in discussing topic 18 and had shown that this is a baseless claim. These readings are not mutawatir at all. Not only the chains of narration are mentioned in our books, and there are so many other authorities who have just said that by merely looking at these chains, they can see that they are ahad. So this claim actually, I would say, belies his observation, as Zahabi has already pointed out. Viewers, there is a third group in this regard, which says that the intonation, a third group which say that there is I would say the Quran is mutawatir where all the 7 readers agree and all the groups agree. So this is the third group, that where all the 7 canonical readers agree, converge, they have the same reading, that part of the Quran is mutawatir. And this, for example, viewers, is held by a person like Abu Shamma. So to me, none of these views is convincing. Regarding the first group of scholars, the obvious corollary of whose view is that only the consonantal text is mutawatir, then it will have to be believed that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam left a bare consonantal text, an officially compiled consonantal text. And we know this never happened. He never gave an officially compiled codex or someone nominating that this is the person who should read that particular text that he has left behind. This never happened. And so therefore, in the absence of any such consonantal text left by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we cannot accept this view, because we know that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam transferred the Quran primarily in its oral way. It was a read text. It was a verbally transmitted text. It was received by him verbally and also transmitted verbally. As far as the second is concerned, we claim that all the readings are mutawatir. Again, viewers, this is to me belies history, as I said, belies observation, and we have seen that there is no such thing. These readings are not mutawatir at all. And then, as far as the third of these is concerned, viewers, that it says that the readings, wherever all the people agree, they should be regarded as mutawatir. Then again, this also is against, this cannot be acceptable, because then there would be still certain parts of the Quran which are not mutawatir, because there would be places in which these reciters do not agree upon. If we accept that there are places in which all agree upon, then of course that would be the Mutawatir Quran. But what about those places in which all do not agree? So we will have a Mutawatir Quran, if this view is accepted, in which all the societies agree, and we will have a non-Mutawatir Quran in which there is a difference between these societies. So to me, unfortunately, none of these three views is acceptable, and I have already given my view that as far as the Qira'atul Amma is concerned, that is the correct connotation of the Qira'at that we have today, and that is the only Qira'at that is found in the Ummah. Of course, barring those variant readings which are found in our tafsir and hadith books which I have just explained, and also barring those certain countries in which a whole set of canonical readings exists besides some areas of a country as well. Now that shall inshallah be part of my next episode, in which I will endeavor to explain how this happened to be, and till then I would like you to contemplate on the answers of these 4 questions, and I would be grateful for any feedback that you would like to give in this regard as well. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.